Welcome everyone to this episode of the AskJasonGelios show. I appreciate you tuning in to this episode where I will be answering this question: can one realtor represent both a buyer and a home seller? Okay, so I'm a realtor. Let's say I have an open house and a buyer comes in. Right now I represent the seller of the home where the open house is being held. But a buyer comes in and says, I'm not working with an agent. I'd like to work with you to get this done. Okay. Can I represent the buyer as well as maintain my representation to the seller? And the short answer is yes. And I'm going to dive into some more information about this because it's important to understand. Now, some people feel that it's not ethical to represent both a home buyer and a seller. I get that. I understand that. Certain people do it right. They do it the right way, but there are some that take advantage of it. Like any industry, there's bad apples, right? Bad seeds. But what it's called, there's a term for it. And when a realtor represents a buyer and a seller, it's called dual agency. Okay. So in a dual agency situation, the same realtor represents both the buyer and the seller of a home. This arrangement can be risky for home buyers, okay, since agents are paid based on how much the home sells for. So that's where it gets a little bit tricky. That's where it has some people stating that it's unethical, okay. However, dual agency can also be beneficial in helping to simplify a complex transaction. Now think about this. The home buying process, you're a buyer, you're going through the process, and you're a home seller and you're selling your home and you're going through the process. Instead of having two agents go back and forth, okay, and then you get third-party information, you have one realtor that is handling everything. So that is a benefit actually. So in most real estate transactions, the buyer and the seller are represented by each of their own separate agents, okay, like attorneys. Okay, they go back and forth on your behalf. But it is possible, again, for both buyer and seller to be represented by the same agency. Okay, I'm going to share with you some of the risks of dual agency, or the risks of having a realtor represent the buyer and the seller. Okay, now it's no secret that a real estate agent's commission is based on a percentage of how much the house sells for. The house sells for more, that's a benefit. Okay, so in other words, the higher the sale price, the more money they earn. So they're incentivized to get that sales price higher. Now, that's not to say that all dual agents are, they don't have their customers, their clients' best interest in hand, right? That doesn't mean that it's a bad thing. It just means that it raises some potential ethical questions, okay? Now, dual agency in itself is not unethical. It's not. It's legal. It's in most states, okay? Which we'll get to the states where it's not legal in a minute. But there are actions and tactics that, yes, could be sneaky, okay? If you have a bad realtor who is only focusing on the seller and they're trying to get the buyer to enhance the seller's position, that's not good. Okay, it's gotta be fair, okay? Now, for example, let me give you an example, okay? If I'm the agent in a dual agency arrangement, I cannot make suggestions to a buyer about how much to offer because that's not fairly representing the seller. I can't tell a home buyer, in other words, hey, you should offer X amount, okay? Because I know my seller will take it. You can't do that, okay? And you shouldn't do that anyway. Let's dive back to what states dual agency is not legal, okay? So, I do want to note though, before I dive into these states, that the fact that it is illegal in several states, in a handful of states, should be enough to give some parties, pause and elicit further consideration. So they should actually think about, is this the right thing for me, okay, as a buyer or seller? But dual agency is illegal at this time of the video. Is Alaska, Colorado, Florida, Kansas, Maryland, Texas, Vermont, and Wyoming. Okay, so dual agency is illegal in those states. So I shared some of the risks in the states of where it's actually illegal, right, to have a realtor represent the buyer and the seller. I want to share some advantages, okay, and then we'll close out this episode. So it does offer a smoother transaction. Documents can be prepared, faster and quickly. Okay, and there's one person who knows everything about the property. So if the home buyer has a question, they'll get an instant answer or a faster answer if the listing agent, right, the seller's agent, has to ask the seller about something about the property. Okay. Now, if you have a realtor and they're working on the buyer and the seller side, there's a chance that you can get a deal on the commission rate. Okay. For example, if a realtor is typically charges 6% to offer 3% to a buyer's agent and 3% to themselves, which is standard. Okay, there's a new law in place that is kind of affecting buyer agent commission. Not to dive into that in this episode, but you know what? The seller might say, hey, listen, can you charge 5% because you're handling both sides? Listing agent is still making money, right? They're representing the seller and the buyer. They're still making money, and they don't have to, but they can offer a discount to the seller. Okay. So what's the bottom line? Well, the bottom line is dual agency is legal in most states and can make for a more convenient transaction, provided you understand the risks. You have to understand that there's always a risk or two. Okay. Now, it's often not recommended, and I'll tell you why. Because every home buyer, and this is my opinion, but every home buyer should have someone in their corner who doesn't represent the seller, right? Somebody who is fighting for you, okay, like an attorney would in court, okay, and they are working not in the seller's favor, but in the buyer's favor. I just think that's extremely important to have someone in your corner of the ring, okay? Because sometimes it is a battle trying to get your offer accepted, coming to terms or whatnot. Okay, so, but that's not to say that dual agency or a realtor representing a buyer and seller is a bad thing. Okay, it can happen. It just depends on the situation. The most common I see it where it happens is when there's an open house and a buyer walks in without representation. Okay, so sometimes that happens. Okay. So share your thoughts in the comments. What you think about this episode? A lot of great information. I'd love to read in the comments what you guys thought about this episode, what you think about this episode, and of course follow me on the social media channels wherever you're watching this. If you're watching it on YouTube, go ahead and hit subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss out. Otherwise, I'm Jason Gelios, Michigan Realtor. I appreciate you watching.